It's killing the lives of thousands of black kids.
Not a 1.3 people, a 0.13.
The school system messed up.
Big time, big time. Failed him, big time, big time.
City schools denied our requests and gave us nothing. So we sued.
I want to take this opportunity to apologize to those students and families who may have been affected.
Dr. Stanley, she's failing our children. She's failing them.
Educators consider him a ghost student.
This is a tragedy for taxpayers, but also the community.
How did my son pass if he didn't know none of this math?
Was action taken? Regardless, action was taken. More actions are to come.
You had 5 dead students enrolled at your school.
Do you agree with those calls to see the city school CEO resign, and do you think it's time for a change?
It's worse than anything I've heard in the whole time that I've been governor.
You cannot ask the school CEO no questions, but if you can send it, so, ma'am, that's the process.
I don't want to bury my children in the streets of Baltimore. I don't want them killed in the streets of Baltimore.
What about that failure factory that Augusta Fells Savage became?
My name is Chris Pabst. I'm a reporter for Fox 45 News Project Baltimore, a team of journalists investigating Maryland's public schools. This unit is really the first of its kind in this city dedicated to looking into issues in the public school system. And we've been doing this for nearly 5 years with the help of parents, teachers, students, taxpayers who want change. We've produced hundreds of reports uncovering some very troubling issues in Baltimore City public schools: grade fixing scandals, violence against teachers, students who are graduating despite failing the courses. We have yet to uncover the full scope of the corruption, but a watershed moment came in March of 2021 when we made a startling discovery. A discovery that really showed how deeply the issues go in Baltimore City schools and how those issues have affected generations of people in the community. Meanwhile, many of our elected leaders stand by and just watch this happen without answering our questions. The school board members and the school CEO for years have refused to sit down and speak with us directly about our findings. Many people in Baltimore tell us their voices are never heard. Hopefully this documentary can serve as a reminder that somebody is listening and there is a platform for you to tell your story. Serious allegations at a West Baltimore high school.
What about the kids? What about that failure factory that Augusta Fells Savage became?
A scheme to change grades and inflate enrollment numbers. First exposed by Project Baltimore, and 6 months later, confirmed by City Schools' own investigator.
That's astonishing, absolutely astonishing. What did they, this school needs to be shut down.
The internal investigation would show the problem was even worse than we first reported. Administrators at Augusta Fells had improperly changed grades and put students in classes that weren't even offered.
He didn't fail, the school failed him.
Project Baltimore first discovered grading irregularities at Augusta Fells in March 2021 when we spoke with Tiffany France. Her son passed just 3 classes in 4 years, but was still being promoted through the course levels. With a 0.13 grade point average, he ranks 62 out of 120. In his class.
Where do I turn? Where do I go? Who helps my son? What happens from here?
The report also found students were scheduled in classes that were not offered.
The ghost students were attending ghost classes. The classes didn't exist.
Ghost students, as they're known by educators, can be used to inflate enrollment numbers and increase the tax dollars a school receives. At more than $15,000 per student, Baltimore City Schools is the 5th most funded large school system in the country. Project Baltimore in April spoke with a former student who told us he wasn't in the school because he was in jail.
From August up until December.
So from August to December of 2019, you were incarcerated?
Yes. As I can see in the transcripts, yeah, I'm basically a ghost student, but I didn't attend Didn't enroll in the class or anything. I've been gone since 2017, buddy.
This man's name appeared on a list of 21 seniors enrolled but not attending. And it turns out the problem is even bigger than what we first reported. City Schools identified 100 students with questionable enrollment status at just this one high school. There are 37 other Baltimore City high schools, and when all the ghost students are accounted for, it could be millions of dollars owed back to taxpayers. And the question remains, will anyone face criminal charges?
It certainly sounds like fraud. If somebody is keeping them on the rolls, that's fraudulent. That's theft of taxpayers' money. That's a crime.
While outside agencies continue their investigation, 4 people have been implicated in the scheme. 3 no longer work for city schools, including the principal, Tracy Hicks, and the assistant principal, Joy Wasiga.
So if the only thing that we have left is bringing people into a courtroom in handcuffs, to answer for their actions, that's, if the evidence dictates it, that's certainly something that would be appropriate.
The district has assured parents Augusta Fells is now under the guidance of an experienced and transformational principal, Kamala Carnes. But we found Carnes also has a questionable past. No comment. You don't even know what my questions are. How can you say no comment? Carnes has been the focus of 2 internal investigations by city schools. One in 2017 as principal of Claremont Middle High, where she was found to have mismanaged a student's activity fund. The other in 2019, when Project Baltimore reported on allegations of grade changing at Joseph C. Briscoe Academy. An internal investigation ultimately cleared Principal Carnes in the Briscoe case, but the report was inconclusive as to whether improper grade changing was happening at the school. And when the report came out, Carnes was already at Augusta Fells. After the stunning findings at Augusta Fells, Baltimore City School Board refused to speak with Project Baltimore, which we expected. It's been years since anyone from the school board has agreed to an interview with us. Instead, Baltimore City Schools CEO Dr. Sonia Santelises released a statement. The breach of trust by those former employees cannot be overstated. We are disappointed those adults would place their selfish motives above the well-being of students. While our systems worked to uncover the scheme, we also learned lessons that will lessen the chance this can happen again. But for 6 months prior to releasing its initial findings, the district tried to downplay what was happening at Augusta Fells, and the community was really reaching a breaking point. We hear from former Baltimore City students all the time who tell us that the school system just didn't give them the education that they need to support a family or even to support themselves. And we're seeing the fallout from that after generations in what's happening in Baltimore. The population is shrinking, crime is rising, but throughout all of this, it just doesn't seem like the leaders in Baltimore City, the elected leaders, want to take responsibility for what's happening in the school system.
The children in high school have elementary education. Enough is enough.
We're going to bring the revolution. Come hell or high water.
Several community groups called for the city school CEO to resign. They threatened a class action lawsuit claiming city schools failed to educate generations of students. Their case in point, Augusta Fells.
Somebody has to be accountable for that. Somebody has to put the checks and balances in place. And I don't think that Dr. Sonia Santelises has done a thorough job in vetting out any corruption that, directly affects our children.
Baltimore City Mayor Brandon Scott appoints the school board. Fox 45 News asked Mayor Scott if the city school CEO should resign.
This is much deeper than one person. We know that across the country, we have seen issues like this. The system has a plan for how we're going to work with our young people, and we're going to focus on that and focus on helping our young people and not using them for political fodder.
At this point, outrage was growing in the community. Fox 45 News conducted nearly 20 unscientific polls about this investigation alone. Mackenzie Frost joins us now with reaction from the community, which was really overwhelming.
Absolutely, Chris. When we asked our viewers about City Schools CEO Sonia Santelises, more than 90% of them who took the poll said she should be forced to answer for these failing students and the lack of education happening inside the classroom. When it comes to City Council doing its job of holding her accountable, 97% of people say council members elected to serve their constituents in their district are not holding Santelises accountable for these ghost students, poor performance, and grade-changing schemes. And remember, Chris, the City Council does approve the district's budget, so they do have some level of accountability and responsibility here. And I've sent more than 99 different questions to the City Council members asking all about the Augusta Fells investigation, including, is this happening in other schools? Should leadership be held accountable, and should that leadership be changed at the district level? Should criminal charges be filed based on what we found out in this internal investigation? Most of those questions have gone unanswered to this day. And remember, Chris, Mayor Brandon Scott also plays a role in this. They approve the district's budget. Mayor Brandon Scott also has the authority to appoint the members of the Board of Commissioners, who then have the authority to hire and fire the school CEO.
Fox 45 News hosted 9 town halls over the summer to discuss serious concerns in the city, including education. The city's elected leaders refused to participate.
Where do we go from here? Because we cannot have the same conversation, and children are being failed. And for any politician that's hearing this, parents have stepped up, parents have showed up, panelists have shown up, and allies have shown up. When are you going to show up?
You'll only get movement on this issue and get our kids their constitutional rights, which they deserve, which they should have, if enough people scream, stand up, and say bloody murder. I've had enough. I've had enough. Enough of dysfunction.
These children in this city could go through 3 or 4 different superintendents and leadership tracks that roll out new plans. How do we expect to have any results with short-term planning?
She owns it. She should answer to it, and if she cannot come up with a reasonable response, she should be fired.
This city has reached a point of crisis. The murders, the violence, the poverty, the crime, the corruption, all of it has taken a toll. And many people trace that back to a struggling public school system that has produced generations of students who tell us they simply didn't get the education they needed to succeed.
Some of the students who are not being educated now will be some of the students we'll be attending funerals for later on.
In 2021, Baltimore City Schools dropped to an all-time low on a national assessment of student performance. Baltimore ranks second to last in the country among districts tested.
It's killing the lives of thousands of black kids, poor kids, across the board, black, white, or brown.
In 2021, Baltimore also ranked among America's most dangerous cities.
The school system is the primary of all of this. It's not the crime, it's the schools. The crime is directly related to the lack of education and the ability of people to be able to work at a job that will sustain them and their family.
What happened at Augusta Fells was not an isolated incident. Project Baltimore has been investigating the school system for nearly 5 years, and we've reported on just how dire the situation really is. COVID certainly made the situation worse, and the setbacks that we saw were just staggering.
It's heartbreaking. If almost half of our kids are failing, what options do they have after high school? This is really disheartening. It's sad to see this.
41% of Baltimore City public high school students earned below a 1.0 grade point average during the first 3 quarters of the 2020 school year. But the problems in Baltimore did not begin with the pandemic. In 2017, we found 6 Baltimore City schools with 0 students who tested proficient in math or English. Another 13 high schools had 0 students proficient in state math testing. The real-life consequences of Baltimore City's struggling school system can be devastating, and we have seen that firsthand. We interviewed a man who was 66 years old, made it to high school in Baltimore City in the 1960s without learning one important skill. I hate to ask you this question and put you on the spot, but what does that sign say? Can you read that?
The first two words I can't read it, but Harbor City High School, home of the oppressed. That's it.
Home of the...
Can't get the last word.
You don't know what that last word is?
No.
It's pirates.
Pirates, okay. I could never get the syllables in school. Yeah, it's been tough.
Been tough?
Yeah, real tough. And when people know you can't read, they take advantage of you.
How did you survive?
It was hard. It was hard. It was hard.
We also met a 39-year-old single mother, Michelle Bradley, who said the same thing happened to her in the 1990s. She made it to high school without being able to read.
They failed me because if you're passing me, but you know I'm not getting this, then yes, I do blame, I blame them.
This is something that we hear often, that Baltimore City Schools is pushing kids through the school system, and in some cases, teachers have told us that they have been pressured to change failing grades to passing.
We have graduated kids who can't read.
Flat out can't read.
Flat out can't
Illiterate.
read. Illiterate.
Getting a high school diploma.
Had a diploma in their hand that they couldn't read. That sounds like an exaggeration or hyperbole. It's not.
How did my son pass if he didn't know none of this math? They passed him. They just passed him along.
What was that text telling you to do?
Go into my grade book, make sure no students are failing, and essentially change the grades if they are failing so that they will pass with a 60%.
I feel as though that's setting him up for failure. What's the point of having passing and failing if you can fail every class and still pass? Like,
it's ridiculous. It's sad. We got smart and bright kids out here. These kids aren't, failing because they can't do it. They failing because they know they can. That's the difference.
With the community reeling from the findings at Augusta Fells, City Council decided to hold an investigative hearing, calling the school CEO to ask her questions. And Mackenzie, at this point, the community really felt like there was going to be some accountability.
Yeah, the public thought they would get some answers for some of these failures, but really it turned out to be the exact opposite. During that hearing, City Schools attempted to discredit the reporting on Augusta Fells, most of which would later be confirmed, when the public also found out they would not be able to ask any questions or really direct those questions to the CEO of City Schools, Dr. Sonia Santelises, at all.
You cannot ask the school CEO no questions, but if you
I don't
can
care
send
who
it,
gets the question.
ma'am, that's the process. That's the
I'm
process.
asking the question. You can direct it to
And
whomever. I want to
post that
understand
person.
who are we
You
asking
understand?
questions to?
You can make comments, but no questions to the school
Well, then what is the
CEO
purpose
or
of
the city
hearing the
council.
question and answer period?
Okay, well,
Councilman,
that's the
that makes no
process.
sense. Just like the school board and all the administration makes no sense.
You all should have your hands up and be screaming at this woman because she's failing our children.
That meeting in April ended with Committee Chairman Councilman Robert Stokes agreeing to bring back the city school CEO for another meeting to get even more answers. And I tried dozens of times to try and find out when that meeting would take place.
We're going to schedule her back. That's why I recessed it.
Okay.
It didn't go back out to the community. So we wanted to make sure we recessed it so we have another hearing. So we come back. Not yet, but we will have another hearing.
2 months ago, you said you were going to schedule it. Now you want to wait for the investigation to be over?
I want the investigation to be over. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. I looked at it. I said that, but let's let the investigation go where it goes and then go from there.
3 months later, in September, the district released the explosive findings of its internal investigation. Councilman Stokes called another hearing. For more than 2 hours, no one asked a single question about Augusta Fells.
Given that those students and the grades have been a part of the culture here in Baltimore City since I was even a child, what are the steps that you're taking to change the culture? What are you doing as the CEO or the board to hold like principals, administrators, and teachers to integrity in reporting the attendance and the grades?
We have gone deep with allegations when they arise, and I think we have demonstrated that those folks, when they are found out, it sends the signal that it's not tolerated. We work with authorities when necessary to pursue those who deliberately come out to mislead the public, mislead families, and most importantly, to mislead children about their progress.
So Mackenzie, there was really only one question about Augusta Fells in an investigative city council hearing that was called because of Augusta Fells.
Exactly, Chris. And after that second hearing, we were left with even more questions, none of which, though, the Mayor Brandon Scott or Councilman Robert Stokes were willing to answer. You never mentioned the report, the investigation that came out of Augusta Fells.
Well, the hearing actually wasn't about Augusta Fells. The hearing is more about school performance.
As chair, did you think it was important to bring that up? School performance, that does include grade changing.
Yeah, he brought it up.
But you didn't.
Well, because my focus, again, was school performance. That's what was my focus. And any other council people want to bring up about Augusta Fells, they had the opportunity.
Weeks after that hearing, we learned Augusta Fells was not the only school with ghost classes or ghost students. Another Baltimore City school, Claremont Middle High School, apparently had some of the same issues. And that's according to its former principal, who told us she had been watching our coverage of Augusta Fells. And for her, it seemed all too familiar.
I believe that it is happening at many schools.
Angel Lewis is currently suing Baltimore City Schools for wrongful termination. She claims North Avenue violated state whistleblower protection laws because when she got to Claremont in 2016, she began reporting what she found at the school under the previous principal, Kamala Carnes. You had 5 dead students enrolled at your school.
At the time that I inherited the school, yes. Several staff members, they actually went through the roster with me and let me know who had attended, who never attended, who was deceased. One of the teachers even mentioned to me that she attended the funeral.
When Lewis took over, she says 130 students were enrolled at the school, but only about 30 were attending. Ghost students, as they're called by educators, are only enrolled on paper.
Because I was the one who reported it and began to give attention to it, I then became the scapegoat. It's better to blame the new person.
City Schools declined an interview, but said in a statement, in part, it is important to understand that the allegations in any legal complaint are tested through an extensive process to determine whether they can be proved true. This is the original lawsuit Lewis filed against City Schools. It details how she issued complaints with the district that Claremont was cheating on the statewide assessment, graduating students that were not eligible to graduate, and had teachers not qualified to teach. Angel filed complaints stating the students were enrolled in classes that did not exist, saying Claremont's schedule did not include math or science courses, which are required to graduate.
These classes aren't listed. How are students in English 1 if English 2 isn't listed? Or how are they supposed to be in math and the math classes aren't there? And how is this working for science, because there are no science courses for me to work with the registrar to select with the students?
Did you have students at your school that got a high school diploma from Baltimore City Schools that didn't earn it?
I absolutely believe that. Prior to me being a principal, and quite frankly, unless something's changed, probably is still going on today.
All of this raises serious concerns about transparency in Baltimore City Schools, which has been an ongoing issue. In 2017, Fox 45 News had to sue the school system over the release of public documents. We had requested information about improper grade changing reports. We wanted to know how prevalent it was throughout the school system. But City Schools denied our request and gave us nothing. So we sued them. And after we sued them, they did start to release some information, some documents, including 106 pages that were completely redacted. We believe you have a right to see this report, but apparently in Baltimore City Public Schools, this is what transparency looks like. 106 pages, entirely redacted, every line, every word, blacked out.
Almost a year to get this, and this is what you got last week. This is kind of a poke in the eye and kind of a pretty obnoxious.
Lucy Dalglish is the Dean of Journalism at the University of Maryland. She is an expert in public records policy.
There are some states that really take public records very seriously, and there are some that just kind of blow them off. Maryland is kind of in the middle. Maryland requires that you show bad faith, and quite honestly, I don't think I've ever seen bad faith more obvious. I mean, this is Exhibit A.
The public records lawsuit against Baltimore City Schools went to trial in February 2019. Circuit Court Judge Jeannie Hong heard 10 hours of testimony. In March, she issued her ruling, finding city schools willfully and knowingly violated the law by refusing to release the documents.
Knowingly and willfully violated the law. I thought, first of all, it didn't come as a shock to me.
Judge Hong ordered city schools to turn over all documents and reimburse our legal fees of nearly $200,000. Following the ruling, Maryland's governor and lieutenant governor sat down with Project Baltimore.
The arrogance of some of these school systems to say, we don't care, we don't have to answer your questions, and we don't have to provide you information. It's outrageous.
Accountability is key. You know, they're not accountable to any elected official, and they should be.
You hear teachers say, we've got to reach into our pockets to pay for school supplies. Or when you hear parents saying our kids are freezing or sweating in the classroom, those are real problems. But it's not because they're not getting billions of dollars in funding. It's because of incompetence and mismanagement and complete lack of accountability and the wasting of money.
In 2019, 3 months after the ruling, Baltimore City Schools revised its grade-changing policy. After we win the lawsuit, we start receiving information from Baltimore City Schools, including thousands of emails sent by school employees about grade changing. And as we were reading through them, we found cases of failing grades being rounded up to passing, students being promoted even when they don't show up to class, teachers fighting back after being pressured to change grades. We also had an email from a city school's assistant principal who said their children suffer from learned helplessness. We showed that email to a former city teacher.
You said the problem. You said what the problem was. We've promoted them up until now, and now we're going to hold them accountable. But you have to understand they have learned helplessness, so you might want to change the grade. Make up your mind.
In October 2021, 3 Republican state delegates authored an op-ed in the Baltimore Sun. The lawmakers wrote, "The level of fraud in Baltimore City schools is like a cancer. It has metastasized almost completely unchecked for decades." You're blaming the legislature.
I think that they're complicit in what is going on. By the work that you have done, and certainly the work that the Inspector General's office has discovered, we have kids that are being counted and then not showing up for class. We have the ghost students. We're spending millions of dollars to educate kids that aren't there.
Maryland schools get about $15,000 per student enrolled. Baltimore City gets a little more, making it the 5th most funded large school system in America. But from this investigation, we analyzed state data, and we found a lot of that money is going to educate students who are labeled whereabouts unknown. In other words, they can't be found. But the school is still getting the money to educate that child. And it's a lot.
The fact that we're funding students whose whereabouts are unknown, and not a small number, thousands, and it adds up to tens of millions of dollars, that's something that needs to be looked at.
In 2019, 40 students at Augusta Fells were labeled whereabouts unknown. Throughout the entire state, it was 6,126 students. Taxpayers spent nearly $93 million in 1 year to educate students who could not be found. So you think it does make more sense to fund schools based off attendance than this 1 day a year enrollment on September 30th?
Yes, I do agree with that.
Maryland's comptroller and Democratic candidate for governor is calling for the state to change how public schools are funded.
It's a very simple solution. Instead of taking one tally at September 30th to see who's in school and who's out of school, they need to do it monthly. It's unacceptable for taxpayers' money to go for students that are knowingly not in the school system.
In the 2021 session, Maryland's legislature passed a massive education funding increase known as the Kerwin Plan. But Mackenzie, many people's concern is that additional money may not help if there also isn't additional accountability and transparency.
Yeah, Chris, the Office of Inspector General for Education was created for that very purpose and that very reason, but it went from an expected office of 7 down to a staff of 3, and those 3 people are responsible for the entire state of Maryland.
On top of that, you also have a very large, very powerful teachers union that is involved.
Yeah, and critics say that the teachers union are opposed to competition to programs and institutions like charter schools or other programs that would allow students to go to private schools using public dollars.
Nearly 20 years before Kerwin, Maryland passed similar legislation called Thornton. At that time, it was the largest increase in education funding in Maryland's history. But more money did not create better results. Graduation rates and state test scores compared to the national average stayed about the same.
But if we're just throwing more money at the problem and we don't go back to the very basic root of all of these problems, we're not going to get anywhere. Someone else will be sitting here with you in 10, 15 years, and you'll be having the exact same conversation if we don't go back and fix the problem first.
For 7 years in a row, Baltimore City has recorded more than 300 murders. 2021 closed with 337 murders.
This is for you. That 15-year-old that was killed yesterday, this is for you.
Enough is enough. Enough is enough.
What grade would you give them?
F.
F. Do for us what you want done for you and your children. Don't forget who you are.
Baltimore City's population has dropped to 585,000, the lowest in 110 years. People are leaving.
Well, I'm from Baltimore, born and raised. I have 3 deceased baby fathers, all of them gone. One got killed in 1993. Another one was murdered in 2004, and then my girl's father was murdered in 2015. I come from a family of destruction, you know, and I'm trying to break the cycle.
Patrice Lovett's 17-year-old son is a Baltimore City student. He is the youngest of her 3 boys. In 2020, he was arrested in connection with an armed robbery.
You know, I'm trying to tell my son, you don't want to go that road, you know. It's not the road you want to go.
Are you worried that your son's not going to graduate?
Yes, I am.
In 2021, 28 people under the age of 20 were killed in Baltimore.
I'm not going to give up on him. I don't want him to end up like his brothers who are statistics to Baltimore.
Your 2 older sons are in jail?
Yes. They look to the streets because they feel like they have no other way to go. I don't want to bury my children in the streets of Baltimore. I don't want them killed in the streets of Baltimore.
Project Baltimore has been investigating the public school system for nearly 5 years, and in that time, we have learned the problems run generations deep. Many believe the system is broken, and the failures in the school system eventually reach the streets.
And really, the taxpayers, the parents, and ultimately the kids are the ones paying the ultimate price in this. And the community, Chris, has reached such a crisis point with the crime growing out of control. They're essentially begging city leaders to save the city, but no one is taking responsibility. Not the mayor, not the city council, or even the Baltimore School Board.
You are the ones who can make the difference, which is why Project Baltimore and Fox 45 News are committed to telling your stories. This is just the beginning. We're going to continue to hold public officials accountable for the future of this city. I'm Chris Pabst.
And I'm Mackenzie Frost.
And thank you for watching this Project Baltimore special.